He waited quietly in the back, just proud to see me in that cap and gown. But right when I walked across the stage, my stepdad grabbed the mic and said, "If it weren't for me paying every cent, she'd be nowhere." I froze. My real dad stood in silence. Then I looked over and saw my mother smiling. Have you ever watched someone rewrite your story, right in front of everyone? If this moment hit you too, don't scroll away. Like, comment, or share your thoughts below. And if you've ever had to stand up for the truth, you're not alone. My name is Nicole Harris, and for most of my life, I lived in what people called a blended family. It always sounded so smooth, so intentional, like something soft and warm out of a parenting book. But if you peeled back the cover, you'd find something a lot messier. I was 5 when my parents split. My dad, Brian, moved 3 states away to take a job that would pay better, enough to send child support without missing a beat. My mom remarried a year later, to Jim. Jim was complicated. On the surface, he seemed like a stand-up guy. He was polite, had a good job in construction management, and mowed the lawn on Saturdays. People in the neighborhood waved to him like he was some kind of suburban hero. But to me, Jim was always more interested in controlling the narrative than being part of the family. He wasn't cruel, not in the traditional sense, no yelling, no violence. But he had this way of making you feel small with just a look, or a dismissive, He liked to talk over you at dinner, correct your grammar in front of guests, say things like, "Your dad wouldn't know the first thing about how we do things here." Subtle digs that my mom never challenged. She usually just sipped her wine and changed the subject. Still, I grew up trying to see the best in him. Maybe it was survival instinct. Maybe it was hope. He showed up to school events, even if he sat 2 rows back with his arms folded. He paid for things, or so I thought. He told me to call him Dad, and at first I did, but it never felt quite right. My real dad, Brian, never stopped calling, never missed a birthday. Every other holiday he drove 9 hours to spend time with me. We had our routines, pancakes at this little diner when he visited, walks through the bookstore downtown, movie nights with too much popcorn. He wasn't flashy, but he was constant. And when I turned 13, he sat me down and said, "Nicole, your education matters more than anything. I've got a college fund just for you. No matter what happens, you'll be taken care of." I didn't fully understand what that meant then. I just knew that someone out there, someone far away, was quietly building my future. Back at home, though, Jim's presence loomed large. He liked to play the provider. Every time we went out to dinner, he'd make a big show of paying the bill. If I got new shoes or a laptop, he'd say, "Guess who made that possible?" He never let me forget it. I kept my head down through high school. I studied hard, volunteered, joined the yearbook club. I got accepted into a great university with a partial scholarship. The rest of the tuition? Well, I didn't have to worry. My dad said, "It's all covered, sweetheart. Focus on learning." And I did. College was the first place where I felt like my own person. I called Dad every Sunday to catch up. Mom called sometimes too, usually with updates about Jim's latest promotion or backyard project. I learned to smile through those calls. Still, I never wanted drama. I never wanted to choose sides. I just wanted to make them all proud. I never suspected what would come crashing down the day I graduated. It was sunny, and the university lawn was packed with families holding signs, flowers, and cameras. I wore my cap and gown like armor. I spotted my dad first. He stood near the back of the crowd, sunglasses hiding his eyes, holding a bouquet of purple lilies. My favorite. Jim and my mom sat closer to the front. Jim was wearing a suit and that smug half-smile he always wore when he thought the world owed him a thank you. My mom looked polished, her phone ready to record every second. As my name was called and I walked across the stage, something shifted. I didn't know it yet, but everything was about to unravel. Jim stood up, He moved toward the podium. I thought maybe he just wanted a better picture. But instead, he reached for the mic. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Jim stepping toward the podium? That had to be a mistake. Maybe he was just congratulating the speaker or trying to fix something with the sound. Surely he wasn't. But then I saw him reach. Saw his hand wrap around the microphone like it was his by right. The MC, a soft-spoken dean, looked confused, unsure whether to stop him. Jim didn't care. He cleared his throat, tapped the mic twice like some self-appointed VIP, and smiled broadly into the crowd. And then he said it. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we move on, I just want to say a few words about my daughter." The crowd quieted. I felt my stomach twist. "I've watched her grow into the woman she is today," he said. "And none of this," he gestured grandly to the stage, to me, "none of this would have been possible without the sacrifices I made. I paid for this education, every semester, every bill, because that's what a real father does." I couldn't breathe. There was a pause, a moment where I think even time stood still. Then came a few polite claps from people who didn't know any better. Maybe they thought it was sweet. Maybe they didn't see what I saw. My dad, Brian, standing completely still in the back, holding the flowers like they were the only thing keeping him upright. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at the man who had taken his place, taken his credit, taken his voice. My chest burned. I scanned the crowd for my mother, hoping, begging, to see disapproval on her face. Something. Anything. But she was smiling. Not a nervous smile, not an embarrassed one. She was proud, filming, holding up her phone to capture Jim's speech as if it were something noble, something true. And that was the moment something broke in me. It wasn't just the words. It wasn't just the lie. It was seeing the people who were supposed to protect me twist the truth so casually, so effortlessly, like it cost them nothing. All those years I tried to keep the peace. All those times I pretended their version of the story didn't bother me. I had bent myself into shapes to keep both men in my life, believing balance was better than truth. But this was theft. As Jim handed the mic back and returned to his seat, I forced myself to keep walking. Smile for the camera, shake the dean's hand, accept the diploma that was suddenly heavier than it should have been. I didn't look at Jim. I didn't look at Mom. I couldn't. Later that afternoon, we gathered outside near the fountain for pictures. Families everywhere were hugging, laughing, taking selfies. I felt like I was standing in the middle of a noise I couldn't hear. Jim kept bragging to a group of my mom's friends about how proud he was, how hard he'd worked to make this happen. My mother laughed and nodded like she was his publicist. My dad stood off to the side, quiet, clutching the flowers he brought like he wasn't sure if he was still welcome. I walked over to him. I didn't say anything. I just hugged him. And for the first time in my life, I held on longer than he did. "Sweetheart," he whispered, "you don't have to say anything." But I did. Did you hear what he said? He smiled faintly, like he didn't want to make a scene. "It's not the first time someone else took credit for my work. It won't be the last." That broke me more than Jim's speech ever could. It wasn't just the lie. It was that my father had learned to swallow it, to make peace with being invisible. That night, we had dinner at a restaurant my mom picked. Fancy, overpriced, white tablecloths and sparkling wine. Jim ordered for the whole table, toasted to himself. Mom cheered with him. They didn't ask my dad to join. Brian said he was fine grabbing a bite somewhere on the way home. He hugged me outside, told me how proud he was, and drove off alone. No complaints, no bitterness, just a tired smile. I watched his car disappear and felt the sharpest ache in my chest. Because I realized silence was how he protected me. All those years. He'd paid and never paraded it. He'd supported me without needing to be praised. Jim, on the other hand, had used my graduation as his stage. My mom, she'd handed him the script. That night, I couldn't sleep. My cap and gown were still draped over the chair. The diploma rested on my desk. I sat on my bed, scrolling through pictures of the day, and felt sick to my stomach. There had to be a way to make this right. Not just for me, for my dad, for the truth. I pulled up my student portal. I remembered something my dad had told me freshman year. He kept every receipt, every payment. He wanted me to understand that education wasn't free, but it was worth fighting for. So I started digging. Through emails, through the financial aid office, through the billing department. I made notes, dates, amounts. And as the numbers added up, so did my fury. Because what I found was undeniable. The university's billing portal wasn't exactly user-friendly, but I didn't care. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for clarity. Each semester had its own breakdown: tuition, housing, meal plans, lab fees. Most students skimmed over this stuff, but I dug deep. I clicked through line by line, matching every charge to a payment date. Most important of all, I noted the payer's name. What I saw wasn't just enlightening, it was damning. My father, Brian, had paid 85% of my tuition and school costs. Every semester, direct wire transfers from his account, usually the day after each bill posted. Jim? 2 small payments, both during my sophomore year, totaling less than 1 month's meal plan. That was it. The man who stood at my graduation and claimed he paid for everything had, in fact, done next to nothing. And the man who stood silently in the back? He'd carried nearly the entire burden without ever asking for a single ounce of recognition. I took screenshots of every transaction. I created a spreadsheet that would make an accountant weep with joy, color-coded, organized by semester, with a column labeled Actual Contributor. And then, I wrote. I didn't start with rage, I started with a thank you. I wrote a letter, not just to my father, but to everyone who had ever believed in the truth, quietly, patiently, without demanding the spotlight. I called it Who Really Stood Behind Me, and I poured myself into every word. I told the story of my graduation, of Jim's mic grab, of my dad's silence. I included the data, not to brag or expose finances, but to show what integrity looks like in numbers, the real kind. Then, I posted it. Not on Facebook, not on Instagram. I posted it on the student forum, where alumni, faculty, students, and even board members often shared personal reflections. It was a space for authenticity, and this was as real as it got. Within hours, comments began pouring in. This broke me. My dad was the same, quiet, steady, invisible. Thank you for saying what so many of us can't. The way he stayed silent, and the other man claimed the moment? Disgusting. By the next day, the story had been shared over 500 times. Students sent it to their parents. Alumni reshared it on LinkedIn. One of my professors emailed me privately. Nicole, this is powerful. Your father sounds like the kind of man we don't thank enough. Still, I didn't mention Jim or my mom by name. I didn't need to. The people who knew me, they knew exactly who I was talking about. Then came the email from the university's alumni department. They wanted to feature my story in their upcoming newsletter, an issue dedicated to the unsung heroes behind our graduates. And just like that, the spotlight shifted. I printed out a physical copy of the article. I folded it neatly, slid it into a blank envelope, and I hand-delivered it to my parents' house the next weekend. No note, no dramatic confrontation, just the truth, printed in black and white, resting quietly in their mailbox. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to take the mic. I just had to show people what was already there. I didn't expect an immediate explosion. I wasn't seeking revenge with fire and fury. But truth has a way of echoing in the right places, louder and longer than any staged speech ever could. Within a week, the alumni newsletter went out, and my piece was right at the center of it. Dozens of messages flooded my inbox: strangers, classmates, professors. Most were kind. Some were deeply personal. A few were angry. One came from Jim. It was a 2-line text. "Really classy. You made me look like a liar. Hope it was worth it." I didn't respond. I didn't have to, because the people around him were already drawing their own conclusions. A mutual friend of my mom's, Mrs. Kensington, who used to host all the neighborhood barbecues, called me privately. She told me Jim had brought up the article during one of their gatherings, saying it was misleading and taken out of context. But she hadn't bought it. She said, "Nicole, I've known your dad for years. We all knew who really stepped up. We just didn't realize how much." That hit harder than I expected, because it wasn't just about setting the record straight. It was about shifting the way people saw my father, restoring something to him that had been quietly stolen for years: dignity. And Jim? The more he tried to clarify the story, the worse he looked. The man who had once insisted on being seen as the provider was now being exposed as someone who had clung to a lie for validation. At church, my mom told me, people started asking awkward questions. One woman apparently asked, "Did Brian really pay for everything? I thought Jim handled all that." My mom, caught off guard, apparently stammered something vague and walked away. I'd never meant to humiliate her, but I also didn't flinch. She'd stood there smiling as Jim claimed everything. She'd filmed it like it was truth. That silence made her complicit. She had always chosen comfort over confrontation, image over honesty, and now that image was cracking. Then came the phone call I didn't expect. Brian. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently. "Did you really write that piece everyone's talking about?" My heart skipped. "I did," I said. "It was time." There was a pause, a long one. "I didn't think anyone noticed," he said finally. "All those years, I just did what I could." "I noticed," I said, my voice trembling. "I always noticed. I just didn't know how to say it." That conversation did something for both of us. It rewrote a silent chapter. He'd never asked for recognition, but now he had it, from me and from the world. And Jim? He unraveled faster than I expected. At a small alumni event my mom and Jim attended, a casual dinner hosted by the Parents Association, someone brought up the letter that went viral. Not knowing Jim was that stepdad, they praised the author's father for his quiet dedication. Jim reportedly turned red, said nothing, and left early. My mom called me afterward. Her voice was tight. "You really couldn't have just let it go?" "Let it go?" I repeated. "You stood there while he took credit for 8 years of sacrifice, and you smiled." "That's not fair. What's not fair is a man who paid for textbooks being treated like a stranger. What's not fair is you pretending the truth doesn't matter." She didn't reply, just hung up. It didn't matter anymore, because the truth was already out, and it was ringing louder than any mic ever could. When someone steals the credit, the truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to be seen. If you've ever watched someone twist your story and walk away smiling, drop a comment. Your voice matters here. And if this hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. The silence between me and my mom stretched for days. Not cold, not explosive, just silent. She didn't call. I didn't either. There was nothing left to clarify, and everything left unsaid. But I knew we weren't done. Not yet. Because a truth this loud doesn't just echo, it invites consequence. And people were starting to ask the questions I'd never dared to ask aloud. A week after our last call, I received an email from the university's Family Engagement Office. Apparently, they were organizing a panel for an upcoming Families That Support event, and they wanted me to speak, specifically, about the letter. I stared at the screen for a long time. I could almost hear Jim's voice in my head. We don't air family business in public. But this wasn't airing dirty laundry. This was correcting the family portrait. I accepted. 2 days before the event, I called my dad. "Hey, Dad. They invited me to speak at this thing. About what I wrote." There was a pause. Then he said, "You sure?" "I think I need to be." He didn't offer advice. He just said, "I'll be there, but only if you want me there." "I do." Then I took a breath and did something I hadn't done in weeks. I called my mom. She answered, sounding a little guarded. "Nicole?" "I wanted you to know," I said. "I'm speaking at the university event this weekend, the panel, about family support." There was a beat of silence. Then, "So, this is public now?" "It already is, Mom. You're going to humiliate us." "No," I said calmly. "I'm going to tell the truth. You can come, or not. That's up to you." I didn't wait for her answer. I just hung up. The morning of the panel, I wore a simple dress. No bright colors, no dramatic makeup. I didn't want to look like I was performing. I wanted to look like myself. The event was held in a mid-size auditorium on campus. Rows of folding chairs, a podium, soft lighting. My dad arrived early, as always. He sat in the second row, not the front, never the front. But when I looked his way, he gave me a small nod, the kind that said, "I see you. I'm here." Then just before we started, I saw them, my mom, and Jim. They slipped in quietly, sitting off to the side. Jim looked tight-jawed, like he'd swallowed something bitter. My mom scanned the room like she was searching for approval. Let them look, I thought. Let them see. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming space, my voice, my version, my reality. When my name was called and I walked up to the mic, my hands didn't shake, my voice didn't crack. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of who might be listening. I was ready. I stood behind the podium, the lights soft but focused, casting a quiet heat across my shoulders. The room wasn't packed, but it felt full. Not with people, though there were plenty, but with expectation. A strange kind of stillness that falls just before a storm. I scanned the faces quickly. My dad's calm, my mom's unreadable, Jim's tense. I took a breath. "Good afternoon," I began. "My name is Nicole Harris. I graduated from this university last month, and I want to tell you a story. Not a speech, not a monologue, not a story." I kept my tone level, like I was talking to one person instead of a crowd. "I want to talk about what it means to support someone, not with noise, but with presence, not with speeches, but with consistency." I told them about my education, the bills, the quiet wire transfers, the Sunday calls. I talked about my real dad, how he never asked for recognition, how he never made a scene. And then, I told them about graduation day. I described the moment my stepfather took the microphone. I didn't name him, but I didn't have to. I told the audience how it felt to hear someone rewrite the narrative of your life, right in front of the people who matter most. And then I said the line I had practiced only once, but carried in my chest for years. Some people support you quietly because they love you. Others need the whole world to clap for things they never actually did. This story is for the first kind. The room was quiet, dead quiet. I closed my speech with the numbers. No dollar amounts, just percentages. 85% of my college education was paid for by one man, the one who didn't speak that day, the one who stood in the back. That's who carried me. When I stepped back from the mic, there was a pause. Then came the applause. Not thunderous, but steady, solid, like truth landing on solid ground. My dad didn't stand up. He didn't wave. He just looked at me with a kind of peace I hadn't seen in years. But Jim? Jim looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. His jaw clenched, his fists balled in his lap. My mom sat stiffly beside him, her lips pressed into a thin, tight line. After the event, a few people came up to shake my hand. A faculty member even asked if I'd consider publishing my speech formally. I nodded, thanked them, but my eyes kept drifting toward the side exit. Sure enough, Jim and my mom slipped out early. But not before Jim turned back one last time. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. You were supposed to be grateful. You weren't supposed to speak. But I had. And I wasn't sorry. Later that evening, I got a message. From my mom. You embarrassed him. You embarrassed me. I stared at it for a moment. Then typed back. The truth only embarrasses people who built their pride on lies. I hit send. Then I put my phone away. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I owed anyone silence. In the weeks following the panel, something in me shifted. It wasn't loud. It didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt more like someone quietly closing a door they should have locked years ago. The truth was out. The damage, if you could call it that, had already been done. But the healing? That part, that belonged to me. I stopped answering my mother's texts, at least for a while. I needed space, not more justification. Every message she sent came coated in guilt, but never apology. Always phrases like, "We were just trying to honor you," or, "You don't understand what Jim has done for this family." But I did understand. He'd taken credit. She'd let him. And that wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. So I made mine. I packed up the last of my things from the apartment near campus and moved in with my dad. It wasn't a dramatic move. No suitcases slammed, no declarations, just quiet relief. His house was small, warm, a little cluttered with books and boxes from my childhood. He cleared out the spare room without being asked, put up a little bookshelf, bought fresh sheets in my favorite color. No speech, no parade, just love in action. One morning, I found a stack of envelopes on the kitchen table, old tuition statements, payment confirmations, tax records. I looked at him, confused. "I thought you should have these," he said. "You earned it. You deserve to know what got you here." I didn't open them right away. I just placed my hand on top of the stack and nodded. "Thank you, Dad." He smiled. It was never about the money. It never was. Word of the panel slowly trickled through the community. Not everyone talked about it directly, but the shift was there. Fewer invitations came from the people who used to orbit Jim and my mother's social circle. One family who used to host neighborhood dinners didn't invite them this year. Another neighbor apparently asked Jim, half joking, if he planned to sponsor any more students. Jim didn't take that well, apparently. But that wasn't my concern anymore. I wasn't trying to punish him. I was simply living without pretending. That was enough. One afternoon, I received a long letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. My mom's. She didn't apologize directly, but she did write, "I wish I had stood differently that day. Maybe next time I will." It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I haven't responded. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. But for once, I don't feel pressure to fix what I didn't break. Instead, I've been focusing on what comes next. Graduate school applications, weekend hikes with my dad, reconnecting with old friends without needing to explain my family's dysfunction like a disclaimer. I even started tutoring local high school students, kids trying to get into college without always having the loudest support behind them. I see parts of myself in them. I remind them that quiet love is still love, that the ones who show up without applause, are the ones who really stay, the ones worth honoring. It's strange how healing doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels more like standing in a quiet room and realizing for the first time, you can finally breathe. That's how life became, slowly, after everything unfolded. No dramatic declarations, no perfect reunions, just space, just clarity. Living with my dad taught me things I didn't expect. He never tried to make up for lost time. He never overstepped or lectured. He just lived beside me, cooking too much pasta, watching old detective shows, reading in the same room while I worked on my grad school essays. We didn't need to talk about what happened. The peace between us said everything. One night we sat on the back porch, crickets chirping in the dark, our drinks sweating on the railing. Out of nowhere, he said, "You know, I never needed people to clap for me. I just wanted you to know I was there." I looked at him, really looked, and said, "I always knew. I just didn't know how much." That moment, quiet, unforced, meant more to me than any graduation ceremony ever could. As for my mom and Jim, things remained distant. I didn't block them. I didn't rage or retaliate. But I didn't reach out either. I had drawn my boundary, and I stayed behind it. Occasionally, my mom would send short messages. Birthdays, holidays. They were polite, restrained, like someone knocking on a door they weren't sure was still theirs. I didn't ignore her, but I no longer offered the comfort of pretending things were okay. If she wanted real closeness again, she'd have to do more than send words. She'd have to change behavior. And that was on her, not me. Jim, as far as I know, avoided talking about the panel altogether. He reportedly told someone it was a misunderstanding taken out of context. But the people who mattered already understood. Context wasn't the problem. His ego was. What surprised me most, though, was how many people the story touched. A classmate told me her mother cried reading the article and finally reached out to her estranged father. An older alum wrote me saying, "You gave a voice to men like me, silent, present, forgotten." Even some students I tutored came to me after reading it. "You made it okay to speak up," one said, "even if it makes people uncomfortable." I hadn't realized how many of us were walking around with invisible heroes behind us. Parents, guardians, grandparents, mentors, people who paid quietly, stayed steady, and were rarely mentioned. So I started a blog. Nothing flashy, just a space for people to share their stories of quiet support. I called it The Ones Who Stood Behind. Within a month, dozens of submissions poured in, stories full of grace, struggle, loyalty, and love, without applause. That, to me, became the true ending. Not a takedown, not a mic drop, but a ripple. The kind that starts with one voice refusing to be silenced. The kind that grows into something healing. For others, too. Looking back, I don't regret that Jim took the mic. Because when he did, he showed the world who he really was. But more importantly, he gave me a reason to finally take mine.